Now we're going to go on to a slide which is showing you how you can how you put that ArmTutor on. Okay, so to put the ArmTutor on, this is annotated. What we have to do is we have to make sure that the middle of the device, or the middle of that hinge, is in the middle of the elbow. And when we just put the straps into place very, very conveniently, and we'll see exactly the position of the device on the lateral side of the arm. So you can see very clearly here the position of the hinge, the middle of the hinge representing the middle of the elbow. And we extend these grippers so that they're as high up on the arm as possible. The USB can be inserted, and here we can now work with the practice. Okay. Now we're going to look at how the ArmTutor works. What are the actual movement possibilities that the ArmTutor will give you? So that means what the actual movements the ArmTutor will record, which range of motion it will record, and what you can then translate those into the exercise practice. So we're going to press play. And this is me fitting the device. Again, I'm making sure this on the lateral side of the arm. And we are making sure that the straps go in place. What's very important when you have a device, wearable device, is that you can put it on quickly. So you're not wasting a lot of your valuable therapy time while you're putting the device on. So we're putting it into place. And again, with the hand tutor, we can then, once it's in place, we can verify that when we do have full extension, then the device actually, when we're looking at it through the software, when the device will actually record that it's got full extension. Okay, and make sure it's comfortable. So here the hand tutor, the arm tutor is designed to pick up abduction, and here we're going to forward flexion. So the shoulder movements, external and internal rotation of the shoulder, and elbow extension. Looking at the type of exercise practice that we can do with the ArmTutor. Again, it's a wearable device. That means that I can do the exercises in a sitting position, in a standing position, or in a lying position as well. And again, we're looking at customization of practice. So here you can see that I'm actually giving myself with my left hand the assist. Okay. And lying position is very important to make sure that the computer screen is in a position. Here we're doing internal and external rotation. Here, active assist of elbow extension, and also there's some forward flexion of the shoulder. Here's in a sitting position, we've got some abduction and adduction exercises. Again, this is with a straight arm, abduction and adduction. And elbow extension, elbow flexion and extension. So here, again, as with the hand tutor, we can work against resistance. So we can control that elbow flexion and control the elbow extension, the speed. So it's very important to be able to control the speed, not just the range of motion. And again, against resistance with the forward flexion of the shoulder. So controlling that against resistance. And here we're controlling the external rotation against resistance. Now, as with the hand tutor, I did a combination. So I was doing a grip and then a elbow flexion. Here, the grip remains constant and we were doing an elbow extension flexion with the augmented feedback. And this is a very typical dressing task. So we've taken internal rotation. Here we've taken forward movement of the shoulder. So again, what we do is we take the task and we make sure that we can repeat that range of motion within that task. So here that's an elbow flexion, extension. So that's the range of motion I've set up. And I've now translated that task into movement biofeedback, into augmented feedback. And that's a good description and a good example of what I mentioned earlier, which is being able to see what augmented feedback is all about. With the ArmTutor, it's very important to get the correct positioning of the device. So that will allow us to correctly, if we're looking at the elbow, when we're doing the elbow range of motion measurements, when we're doing the motion analysis measurements, we can correctly see what the passive range of motion is and what the active range of motion is between the within those passive range of motion. So it will correctly annotate what the zero position of full extension was, or where the patient's elbow flexion or extension lies relative to the zero position. On the side of the ArmTutor, you have a soft and hard reset. You have a hard reset. This is a button which resets the range of motion. What we're going to do now is we're going to put the ArmTutor in to a USB socket. You see that the ArmTutor icon lights up in white. When we flex the sensor using that electro-optical sensor, then it becomes green and it allows us to start the exercise practice. We're looking at the correct position of the sensor. Here's the position of the sensor. If we're doing a forward flexion, it's very important that the sensor or the ArmTutor remains parallel as the patient is going into forward flexion to the side wall. And then it will correctly annotate the angular measurement. This is the hard reset. That will reset the angular measurement for both the elbow or the shoulder to zero. Now, when we're going to be doing an abduction, it's very important that the sensor remains parallel to the floor. Now, that's a very good example here. When I move the sensor and keep it parallel, then I'm not going to pick up any forward flexion. So here, when we go on to abduction, adduction, if I can keep that sensor parallel, okay, then I'm not going to, I'm just keeping abduction, adduction and measuring and allowing for a repetitive measurement of that angular motion. So once I've got that repetitive measurement of that angular motion, I can then repeat that measurement within the task. Now, if I was doing a forward flexion, nothing is going to happen. It's only the isolated movement, because I've set up the range of motion by one, isolating the movement of the client, and also isolating the movement of the sensor relative to that movement that I want to practice and I want to repeat. So we have, again, within the range of motion options, we have two options for resetting the range of motion. Here we're doing a forward flexion, but I have my icon here on abduction, so it's not going to record. So I'm going to go back to forward flexion. I've done a forward flexion movement. As I said, I can reset that range of motion by pressing the hard reset, or I can reset that range of motion by pressing the soft reset. And then we can play that game according to the range of motion that I've set up. מה שאני עושה, אני חוזה וחוזה. אם אתה לוקח את הכתרים שהם טובים, הכתרים לא טובים. לא הייתי הולך על זה. אתה רוצה שאני הולך על evaluations של... לא בתוך evaluation. סליחה, ראיתי את זה. ראיתי את זה. בסדר. לא, ראיתי את זה. תעשה לי פוז, רגע אחד. לא, מה שאני עושה, אבי, אני חוזר, בגלל אני יודע שבלבלתי קצת, אז אתה חייב לשמוע. Okay. As with the hand tutor, we can also take tasks which have two directions of movements. So here we go with playing 2D, and again we choose whether we want the elbow or the shoulder movement on a vertical or horizontal axis. Okay, so let's take here a shoulder movement of forward extension, which will be on the vertical axis, and the elbow will be extension flexion. Okay, so the elbow extension flexion and the shoulder forward and back. Okay, we're going to settings. I'm just reversing the forward and backward movement of the shoulder. So there's a forward movement, you can see my camera, and there's a backward movement, and there's a elbow extension. So if again we wanted to prevent a compensatory forward flexion as we were doing an elbow flexion, then I can actually show the client what's happening visually as their forward flexion, as their elbow flexion at the same time. Or I can say, look, I want you to just be on this part of the screen, on the right part of the screen. Keep to the right of the screen, okay? So I want you now, and I can hands-on, I want you just to reach this part of the screen, not coming up here with forward flexion, come down. This is the point that I want you to be. Okay, and then we can play the task, keeping those tasks within the task, okay? And keeping them within the tasks. Okay, so we have the possibility of working with either two directions of movement with the same joint, or two directions of movement with both joints, with the two joints that we can, with the elbow and with the shoulder. What we're going to do now is we're going to go on to leg tutor. No, we're not. What we're going to go on to now is we're going to have a look at the evaluation settings within the ArmTutor. So we have the elbow range of motion. So again, we have the passive range of motion, which we set up. So here we have a look at the evaluation. So we're going to have a look at going into evaluations. So we're clicking on elbow. And again, we build a passive elbow extension and flexion. And then before we go on to next, we ask the patient to cycle as much as they can. And then press next. And then build the active range of motion within the passive range of motion. Press finish. And here we have the full active range of motion. Passive range of motion, the full active range of motion, and the active extension deficit and the active flexion deficit. So there's your extension deficit, there's your extension deficit, and there's your active range of motion within that passive range of motion. And you can save that to your reporting later. And the same when we're going to the range of motion or the motion analysis. The same as the ArmTutor range of motion analysis, we ask the patient with our instructions to do a regular homogeneous movement, a cycle of extension flexion of their elbow, which we do over the course of 15 seconds. And we can annotate that and we can save it as well. And again, what we have is the maximum range of motion during those cycles. We have the maximum repetitions. We can annotate according to the instructions we gave to the client. And we can have a look and see the homogeneity of movement to see whether there was a difference between extension, between flexion, see whether the patient fatigued. And we can write those comments down as well before we save them. What we're going to do now, and we also have the possibility within the reporting section to do the same cumulative measurements. As you saw before, looking at it at more than one evaluation and to see how their measurements or their outcome measures changed from session 1 to session 2.